Today we're going to be learning Moed Katan Daf Gimel. This is the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Adam Plunka in loving memory of his grandfather, Harry Reuben Plunka, Yerachmel Herschel Ben Yisrael, father of Stanley Plunka. Today's daf is also sponsored by Erica Kolach in loving memory of her father, Richard Gluby, Hillel Ben Yosef Kamen on his 25th Yurtzeit. Learning the daf exemplifies my father's maxim: always try something new that interests you. It may lead to a lifelong love. Today's stuff is sponsored by Terry Kravosha and Rabbi Chaim Herring, in loving memory of Terry's father, Judge Norman Kravosha, Nachum Meir Ben Malka, and David on his first Yurtzeit. Our dad was a lifelong learner and jurist who loved nothing better than a well-reasoned argument. Okay, we will get started now with our daf. So what we saw in yesterday's daf was this, the Mishnah. In the beginning of the Mishnah, we said, Mashkin beit hashlachim b'moed ubashvi'it. You're allowed to water a field that needs irrigation, both on Chol Moed and in the Shemitah year, to which the Gemara asked at the bottom of yesterday's daf, which was, I understand on Chol Moed because it's davar ha'aved. If you don't water your field, your whole field is going to get ruined. But what about in the Shemitah year? I don't understand Shemitah. And also because we say, Mishum tirchahu, right? And become say the Shiur Rabbanit. The whole reason we don't want to allow you to do it on Moed is just because we don't want you to do hard labor. But when it's a financial loss, we'll permit this. But ela shvi'it, but when it comes to shvi'it, bein lamad amar mishum zorea, ubein lamad amar mishum choresh, whether you say watering is because of zorea, is because of planting, or watering is because of plowing, either which way is ri'ah b'charisha b'shvi'it mishari. We don't allow planting and we don't allow plowing. So watering should be forbidden just as well. So Amar Abai, we had two answers. One is b'shvi'it bisman hazeh v'rebihi. Right, Abai said this is all according to Rebbe, who holds Shemitah is only midrabbanan. Once it's drabbanan already, we can be lenient. Right, the whole issue is if it's Torah law and it's forbidden, how can we permit it because of a loss? But if it's rabbinic, then of course it's okay. So he says, let's say we hold like Rebbe, our Mishnah holds like Rebbe, that it's only rabbinic in our times. But Rava says, starting from the second to last line on yesterday's daf, Rava Amar afilu tema Rabbanan avot asarachmana toladot lo asarachmana. We could say that even if you hold by the rabbis who hold that Shemitah is still by Torah law even nowadays. But what do you say? There's a difference between avot, the main categories, and the subcategories. So how does this work? Why is this? Right? We have categories and subcategories. We have it in Malachot on Shabbat. And we have it there, if you remember, subcategories are forbidden by Torah law. And we have it by Avot Nizikin. We're going to get to in Bava Kama, where we have main categories, Arba Avot Nizikin. And then within them, there's subcategories. So here we're going to say also, there's main categories and there's subcategories. And the subcategories, okay, right? So for example, like watering, it's going to be a subcategory. And even if it's subcategory of Harisha, right? And let's say, right, so then the whole question is Harisha, forbidden by Torah law or not? But the main thing is Toladot, these subcategories are not forbidden by rabbinic law, by Torah law. They're only forbidden by rabbinic law. Because they're forbidden by rabbinic law, basically we can say, well, then the rabbis permitted it for financial loss. How do we know that Toladot lo asarachmana dichtiv? Ubashana shvi'it Shabbat Shabbaton yela aretz. It says in the seventh year, it should be a day of rest a year of rest for your land. Don't plant your fields. Okay. The continuation is karmechalotismo. Don't prune your vine, your vineyards. And then it says, things that grow, don't cut. And don't cut any of the grapes. So basically, we have a bunch of repetition here, right? So now we're going to see this. We have the main categories are planting and cutting, right? Harvesting. But zmira is basically pruning is a subcategory of planting. And bitzira is basically the same thing as ktsira, but for the vineyard. It's the word used to cut in a vineyard. So basically, if these are basically subcategories of the other or can be learned out directly, then why bother mentioning them? To which they say, it's to teach you that specifically these toladot you're liable for, but not for any others. Okay, so then we're going to basically say that you're not obligated for watering because it's a tolada, and then you don't have to worry about it. So now they say, okay, so that sounds like a good answer. That's Rava. But now we have a question. Velo, wait a minute. Vahatanya, sadchalo tizra v'karmachalo tizmo. What we're going to have now is a long braita. It's going to basically be split into 4 parts. The first 3 parts are going to include all sorts of other activities, things to do in the ground that are forbidden, okay, in your vine or a vineyard or in your field, that are forbidden also, and we learn it out from the Torah, even though they're only toladot. The 4th category is going to be where we draw the line and where we say, well, we don't go this far. And these are actually permitted. Okay, we're going to show some pictures for this. I'll pull up pictures right now. These are pictures, right? We're going to use these pictures throughout. Okay, they're from the Morot Hadaf Yomi, and they're on the portal Hadaf Yomi. So thank you for letting us use them. Okay, here goes the bright. Sadchalo tizmor b'kamarchalo tizmor. So that includes only planting and pruning. Minayim lenikush. What about weeding? Uli idul. Okay, idul, according to Rashi, okay, again, sometimes these are subject to different definitions, is what we see in this picture, picture number 13, where you're digging around the vine. Okay, you dig a little hole, and that's basically to get the ground, you hoe basically, to get the ground to be in better shape. Uli kisuach. Kisuach is the next picture, is cutting the weeds rather than pulling out the weeds, which was nikush. This is cutting the weeds. Talmud Lomar, so how do we know that those are included? Because it says, sadchalo karmachalo. Now notice, it doesn't say lo tizmor karmachalo, lo tizra in your sadeh, and lo tivtzor in your kerem, but it says, or lo tizmor b'kerem, it says karmachalo tizmor. Sadchalo tizra, right? Tizra, karmachalo tizmor. Because it says it in that order, right? Your field, don't. Your vineyard, don't. They learn from here. Lo kol malacha shebesadcha. You can't do any malacha in your field. Lo kol malacha shebekarmacha. You can't do any work in your vineyard. Minai. Okay, so that's the first section. So we learn nikush, idor, and kisuach are all toladot. They're included, and they're included on a Torah level because we're learning it out from words in the verse. Likewise with the next 2 categories. Minayin she'em mekarsemi. That you can't do pruning. Ve'ein mizaldin. You can't trim dry branches. Ve'ein mifasgin be'ilan. Okay, which is either you can't cut large branches, or according to the picture here, they show it a little bit differently, that you have a tree that's leaning over and you basically put something to make the tree go straight up. How do we know you can't do any of those things? Again, Talmud Lomar sadcha lo karmecha lo. Lo kol malacha shebesadcha, v'lo kol malacha shebekarmecha. Not any work that's done in those. Minayin she'em mizabelim, ve'em mefarkin, ve'em ma'abkin, ve'em mashni. Okay, let's go through all these things. Mizabelim is fertilizer. You can't use fertilizer to put it around the tree. Ein mefarkin, you can't remove stones that are on top of the roots of the tree. Ein ma'avkin, which is if the roots are revealed. Okay, I'm looking at picture 18. If the roots are revealed, you can't put dust on top of them. And minayim ema ashnin, you can't fumigate the tree, right? Here by smoke, you're trying to get rid of worms in the tree. I had this with a tree once. Now it's all blackened because of the smoke that we use, but it's a type of way of dealing with worms in trees. So how do we know all these things? Talmud Lomar, sadchalo, karmachalo, kol malacha shebesadchalo, v'kol malacha shebekarmachalo. You can't do any work in your fields at all, or not in your vineyards. So now, again, we could have stopped here, and there we're left with our question, which is, if we're going to say toladot, only the toladot of lo tivtzol and lo tizmol, not to prune, right, and not to cut your grapes, that, and only those are forbidden by Torah law, not any other toladot. What about all these that we've just included? Okay, but in any case, we quoted the brightest. We're going to quote the entire bright, even though we don't really need the rest of this, which is, where do you draw the line? Which is a light kind of hoeing under the olive tree. You can't do a light hoeing underneath the vine. You might have thought you can't fill holes with water. Or don't make these little circular ditches around the vines so that the water will collect. You might have thought all those are forbidden, but Talmud Lomar, Sadcha lo tizra, Zri'ah. Okay, now they're going to tell you. It says Sadcha lo tizra. Now, Zri'ah bichlal hayta. Right? Zri'ah was included in Shabbat Shabbaton, don't work the land. Zri'ah is obviously included in don't work the land. Belama yatzta, so why is it taken out of the klal? Meaning, why is it specified specifically that work? To teach you, lakish elelo, mar lecha, and I'll already tell you this line. People struggle with how exactly to understand this. It's not so clear. Lomar lecha ma zri'ah miyuchedet, avodah shebesadeh v'shebakerem. Zri'ah planting is something you do both in the fields and in the vineyards. Av koshu avodah shebesadeh v'shebakerem. Anything that's also in the fields and also in the vineyards is what's included, but not things that are only in one. And somehow what they're trying to say, and this is the tricky part, that list at the end of things that you can't do this hoeing under the olives or idor under the hoeing under the kfanim. Those are two different types of hoeing, and what's done is one isn't done in the other. And about these mayim, the water that you do is only what you would do under vines, and you wouldn't do it in a field, these holes. So these are things that are not done in both, and therefore they wouldn't be included. Okay. Either which way, we still have our question, which is, this seems to indicate toladot are forbidden by Torah law. Now, remember, when you learn something out by a drasha, by an extrapolation in the pasuk, right? So the pasuk says, sadcha lo, karmecha lo. Does that mean that that's what the Torah meant? Or is that the rabbis connecting their halachot to verses in the psukim and trying to derive it from there? So very often this is our answer we give when we have a question like this. Midirabbanan ukras machta ba'alma. This is really forbidden by rabbinic law only. The rabbis connect it to a verse, but it doesn't mean that this verse is Torah, that what we're learning from this verse is Torah law. So yes, all these toladot are forbidden, but they're only forbidden by rabbinic law, and that resolves our question from the beginning. Okay, now we're going to have another question. And this is just a direct question on one thing listed in this bright. If we're going to assume that this is on the very end of the bright. We said that you can be likashkesh. So now the Gemara says, b'kishkush b'shvi'it nishare. That was the one in the very last category. One of the things was to hoe under the olives. You could do that. It seems perfectly fine according to this. So now they say, really? But it says, Pashmi'it tishmatenu unitashta, right? Bahaktiv, doesn't it say in the verse? Shvi'it tishmatenu unitashta. So the question is, why did they add Shvi'it tishmatena unitashta? What do we learn from each one? Tishmatena, you should rest, right? It should be stop doing things. Mila kashkesh, you shouldn't do kishkush. That already is our contradiction. Unitashta mila sakel. And you should abandon it, meaning you shouldn't take out stones from the land, right? To make it grow better by removing stones. So basically, it seems to say kishkush is a problem. Didn't we just say kishkush is allowed? To which the Gemara answers, this is a very side question, because it's really talking about the part of the Braita that we didn't even really need to be quoting for our purposes. So we're getting off topic, which is something we're going to do a lot today. So now the answer is, Amarav Ukwa Barchama, Tre kishkush have. There's two different types of kishkush, and those are the ones mentioned in each of these sources. If it's for the health of the tree, it's forbidden because that helps the tree to grow better. If it's to close up cracks, then it's allowed. So, but to close up the cracks, that's allowed because that's basically preventing it from being damaged, as opposed to trying to strengthen it to make it grow better. Itma. Now we're going to have a machloket tanaim, and soon we're going to get back from here to something we just said previously. And we're going to quote the exact whole Braita that we quoted with the exact same kind of question we had from before. HaChoresh b'shvi'it, Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Elazar. So we have a machloket about someone who plows in the Shemitah year. Notice it wasn't mentioned in the pasuk there about Choresh. So Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Elazar, Chad amar lokeh v'chad amar no lokeh. One says you get lashes, forbidden by Torah law. The other says you don't get lashes for it. So the question is, why don't you get lashes? Or what's the machloket about? Why do they have a debate? So lema, why don't we suggest, and always when they say lema, we're going to suggest, we usually reject it. So they're going to suggest something. Maybe they're arguing about whether they agree with the particular statement that Rabbi Avin said in the name of Rabbi Eli, which was, before we even start, let me explain some background. There's something called the Yud Gimel Midot Shatorah Nidreshet Bahem, which is 13 ways that we do drashot on the Torah, okay, where there's 13 ways where we could say, oh, if you have this kind of type of style in the Torah, you can learn in this way. So one of them is called a klal upratu klal. That means there's a generalization. then there's something specific, and then there's a generalization again. And if you have that form, klal, prat, klal, then we learn that everything that's similar to the prat is going to be included as well. Because it started with general and ended with general, we're going to include more things than just the specifics. So we're going to say whatever's like the specifics will be included. So here's our example. Okay, if you look in Rashi, which is the words we're going to see in a minute, we're going to see that here in our Gemara, in our topic, in the Torah, we have a klal upratu klal. It says, Ubashana shvi'it Shabbat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. I'm reading in that Rashi. Okay, it's about 12 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashi. In the 7th year, it will be a Shabbat Shabbaton for the land. Okay, that's a klal. It's general. The land needs to rest. It's also in the formulation of a positive commandment. Shabbat Shabbaton is a day of rest or a year of rest, rather than saying don't do something. Okay, then we're going to have Sadcha lo tizra v'karmacha lo tizmor. That's very specific. Don't plant and don't prune. And those are your specifics. And notice it's worded in the negative formulation. Don't do this, don't do that. The next verse is quoted in the next Rashi. It's actually quoted a little bit incorrectly. It should say, Shnat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. A year of rest should be for the land. Again, it goes back to generalization. So we have general, specific, general, and general, positive, and the middle is negative, a lo tasim. So now here comes Rabbi Avin b'Rabbi Eli. He says, Kol makom shnema klal b'aseh, uprat below taseh. If you have a generalization, which is a positive commandment, and then you have a specific, which is a negative commandment, and then it doesn't really matter what the general is after that. In our case, it goes back to positive. Ein danim oto b'klal upratu klal. Rules of general klal upratu klal don't apply because you're switching topics in the middle. You're moving from positive commandments to negative commandments. So we don't go by general rules here. So now, manda amar loke, if you say you get lashes, lately to Rabbi Avin amar Rabbi Eli, you don't hold by him because you say klal upratu klal. It says you can't plant. What's like planting? Plowing is like planting. So we're going to include plowing as well. Therefore, it's included by Torah law. If you say manda amar eno loke, Eli to Rabbi Avin, if you say we hold like Rabbi Avin, then you're going to say there is no klal upratu klal here. Rules don't apply. That means it's only zri'ah and zmira, and it's not going to include plowing, which means plowing is not forbidden by Torah law. Okay? So now, Gemara says, lo, that's not what the machloket is about. Nobody holds by him. Klal upratu klal, this is a regular klal upratu klal, which theoretically should include charisha. So why plowing? So why are you not liable for lashes? Manda amal loke shapir. Makes obvious sense, then you're going to get lashes because it's included. Umanda amar eno loke, he would, right, the one who says you don't get lashes, amar lacha, he would say to you, michti zmira bichlal zri'ah u'b'tzira bichlal k'tzira. Now we're going to go back to exactly what we said earlier, where we said, we already know that zmira is included as part of zri'ah. It's kind of one and the same. It helps it to grow better. And we know that b'tzira bichlal k'tzira, right? And that's the same thing. So lemai hilchata katvinu rachmana. So for what purpose did we write this? Lemeimar da'ahane toladot u'd'machayev atolada achrina lo machayev. This is all to tell you that for those toladot you're going to be chayav, but for the other ones you're not going to be chayav, and that's why it's there to tell you only those toladot not charisha, and that's why he thinks it's not. I'll be back in 1 second. Sorry about that. My computer was unplugged. Okay. So now we're going to explain. So exactly what we said before. Charisha is not included because it's not included because, very simply, it is a tolada that's not mentioned in the verse. So that's why the person who says, no loke. So now we see, by the way, that what we said before, what Rava suggested is his answer. The toladot are not included unless they're written in the Torah. They're only rabbinic. And then the whole Mishnah of Mashkim Beit HaShlachim would work perfectly according to all opinions. That's not actually everyone's opinion, though, because some people think that charisha is included in Torah law, and some people think it's not. Now the Gemara is going to ask the exact same question that we asked before, and just to repeat sugya, so it's going to be a little easier to go through this section, which is below. Really, toladot are not forbidden by Torah law, but what about this braita that included all of these toladot subcategories? V'hatanya sadcha lo tizra v'karmecha lo tizmor. We'll go through this a little quickly because we already read it. We only have planting and pruning. Minayin li'idor, for hoeing, ulekishkush, ulekisuach, right, to get rid of the weeds and to cut the weeds or to pull them out entirely. Actually, kishkush is mentioned here. Sorry. This is the kishkush that we had before, that we said there's two types of kishkush, right? This is hoeing. Okay, so, and kisuach, cutting the weeds. Talmud lomar sadcha lo karmecha lo kol melacha shebesadcha v'lo kol melacha shebekarmecha. Therefore, it includes any work you do in the fields. Uminayin she'em mekartzimim ve'em mezardim ve'em mepaskim be'ilan. Right, you don't cut the the mekartzimim. Actually, we didn't have this word mekartzim. Oh no, we did. Right, this is also a type of pruning, and mezardim, which was taking out the dry twigs, and the mefaskim, which we had some different interpretations. Talmud lomar sadcha lo karmecha lo kol melacha shebesadcha lo kol melacha shebekarmecha lo. Minayin she'em mezablin, you don't fertilize. Ve'em mefarkin ve'em ma'ashnim be'ilan. Here they skip one of them. They skip the ma'abkin, the dust. Okay, but how do you know you can't fertilize? You can't take away the stones. You can't fumigate the tree. As Talmud lomar sadcha lo karmecha lo kol melacha shebesadcha lo kol melacha shebekarmecha lo. There were the three categories of all things you can't do. You might think you can't hoe lightly underneath the olive tree. You can't hoe lightly under the vines. You can't fill up these holes with water. You can't make these holes to collect water for the vines. Remember, Zri'ah was part of the general, not Shabbaton. Then Lama Yatzda, why was it mentioned specifically? Right? So again, we have that is going to say only things that are both in the kerem and in the fields, and that's going to exclude that last category of items. But in any case, all those other categories are included by Torah law, to which the Gemara answers, Rabbanan ukra asmachta ba'alma. It's really rabbinic. The rabbis just connected it to verses. That was the whole first part of today's stuff, which will connect a little bit to the next section, and then we're going to get off on a total tangent. So again, we started with, just to review, we started with our Mishnah, Mashkin Beit HaShlachim, Bashvi'it, right? Moed and Bashvi'it. Moed, we understood. What about Shvi'it? Right? Moed is only, right? It's rabbinic. So, and because of Tircha and because of Hefsed, because of a financial loss, we're going to permit it. Then we moved on to say, well, what about Shemitah? We gave two answers. Abai, who said it's only those who hold Shemitahs to Rabbanan. Rava said, even if you hold Shemitahs to Oraita, still it's an issue. And why is that? Because still it's going to be okay. Sorry. It's because all Toladot that are not mentioned specifically in the Torah, like Harisha and like watering, are basically not forbidden. Okay? And that's why not forbidden by Torah law. They're only rabbinic. And then we had some questions on that. And, like, what about the Braita? And then we resolved it by saying, oh, no, the Braita is only rabbinic. And that's our basic answer. So now we're going to have Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi is one of these people who used to go back and forth from Babylonia to Israel, or really from Israel to Babylonia. So Ki'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Israel to Babylonia, he said the following statement. Yachol, you might have thought, Yilkela Tosefet. You get lashes for Tosefet, for adding on. V'nasiv la Talmuda liftora. But the rabbis, or the Talmud, which really means just the rabbis of that time, exempted. V'lo yadana my Talmudo, my Tosefet. Now, Rav Dimi made this statement that they have no idea. They don't know. What is Yakol Yakala Tosefet? And the Talmuda is Liftora. What was the exemption and what was the addition? We don't understand anything in the statement. So we're going to have two explanations. Rabbi Elazar Amal Charisha. The Tosefet is they added Charisha. Okay, Yochol, again, now let's try to fill it in. You might have thought you'll get lashes for Charisha, for plowing, which is exactly what we were discussing before, and which is why we brought this up. This is what he meant to say, or what Rav Dimi was saying. Yachol yokel Charisha da'ati miklalu pratukal. You can learn it from a klalu pratukal, remember? But the rabbi said even though we don't hold that it's a different kind of klal u'prat klal, and it doesn't work because it's aseh and lo taseh, positive and negative. No, we rejected that. So theoretically, it should be learned out from a klal u'prat klal. But what's the Talmud alif Torah? What limud, what drasha do we have to exempt? What type of learning statement? Te'im ken, kol hanei prat lamali. What do you need zmira and bitzira for? If not to say only zmira and bitzira are forbidden, but no other toladot are forbidden by Torah law, which then exempts you from charisha. You're not going to get lashes for it. Again, it's forbidden, but you won't get lashes because lashes is only for things that are forbidden by Torah law. So that is one way of explaining Rav Dimi, and that's on topic. But Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that this actually means something totally different. And then for this, we're going to get off on a total tangent that we're not even going to finish fully through today's daf. It's going to go on to tomorrow's. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, what's Tosefet here? It's not what we were saying, add on another forbidden malacha. No. It's Yamim Shosifu Chachamim Lifnei Rosh Hashanah. It's what we call Tosefet Shvi'it. This is like on Shabbat. We start Shabbat earlier than really sundown, and we end it later than when the sun is fully setting. We add on extra time. Likewise, we add on extra time to Yom Kippur as well. Okay, there's Tosefet Yom Kippur. We've learned this before through other Masechtot that we've seen. Now we have something called Tosefet Shvi'it, which is you have to also add on to the Shemitah year. So now we're going to read this line of Rav Dimi saying, Yachol yokel Tosefet. You might have thought you get lashes on it, but no, Nasiv la Talmud alif Torah. But the drasha came and exempted us. So now let's understand. So Hachi Kamar, this is what it says. Yachol, this is what Rav Dimi was saying. Yachol yokel, by the way, point out, Rav Dimi is explaining something he brought from Israel. And the two rabbis that are explaining the statement are both rabbis from Israel, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. So now we're going to say, Yachol yokel Tosefet Rosh Hashanah, de'at yami b'charishu b'katzir tishbot. The whole idea of Tosefet Rosh Hashanah, Tosefet really Shvi'it, that you add on to Rosh Hashanah, meaning you don't just start Shemitah on Rosh Hashanah. You start beforehand. We'll see soon how much beforehand. You might have thought you'll get lashes for it. Why did you think that? Because it's learned out from this strange verse, b'charishu b'katzir tishbot. Why do I call this a strange verse? It's different. There's a bunch of different ways to how to understand this verse. This verse is in Shemot Perek Lamed Daled 34, verse 21. And it says, Sheshet Yamim Ta'avod B'Yom HaShvi'i Tishbot, which sounds like it's talking about Shabbat. 6 days you work, and on the 7th day you rest. Charisha B'Katzir Tishbot. You should rest from doing Charisha and Ktsira, which are two of the works you do in the field. Now, many people struggle with this verse because we already know that all these other, first of all, why mention just those two? There's 39 malachot that are forbidden. And we know from other places what it is, although it doesn't say explicitly in the Torah, but it says, Kol malacha lo taseh. So why should we specifically talk about these? So we say it must be talking about Shemitah. The question is, you don't need this to talk about Shemitah because we already know, Sadcha lo tizra, Karmecha lo tizmol. We already learned all this forbidden work. So if it's not talking about Shemitah and those malachot, it must be coming to say, you also can't do Charisha and Ktsira before the Shemitah year. There we have Tosefet. So you might have thought, since we learned it out from a verse in the Torah, that you'll get lashes for it. But the rabbi said you're exempt. For what reason? As we're going to see right now. So now we're going to go off on a tangent to basically explain the second reading of Rav Dimi that has nothing to do with Shemitah and what we were learning about whether it's forbidden to plow. It actually has to do with, or toladot are forbidden by Torah law, but it's coming to teach you about the Tosefet Shvi'it, and you might have thought it was forbidden by Torah law and you would get lashes. Well, you don't. So now, why don't you? And what's the story here? So let's learn. Ma yamim shelifnei Rosh Hashanah. So first of all, when does this Tosefet Shvi'it start? Kiditnan, as it says in the Mishnah. We're going to distinguish between a field with trees and a field with wheat, okay, or things growing in the ground. Ad matai chorshim b'stei ilan erev shvi'it. Until when can you plow a field with trees in it before the Shemitah year? Beit Shammai omrim kozman she'yafeh lapri. If it's still you're serving the fruits that are already grown on the tree from that year, you can still do it. You can plow, but If it's already serving the tree for growing new fruits for the upcoming year, then already you can't do it because that's serving next year, even though the Shemitah year hasn't started. That's Tosefet. Ubeit Hillel omrim ad ha'atzeret. Beit Hillel says until Shavuot, okay, which means right many months before, okay. And by the way, we don't really know Kozman Shefel Pri, but comes the Braita and tells us, the Mishnah and tells us he means very close to Shavuot as well. And this is not a big machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. They're basically talking about a very similar time. Shtei Lavan is a wheat field. Till when can you plow a wheat field? When the rains stop. And anytime that people plow in order to plant zucchinis and gourds, okay, now, or pumpkins. So we basically have, some people say there's no end. It is. It's the same time as the rains is the time when people start planting, which is why we have to stop doing because they're planting for the next season. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but then we add on this extra thing, which is Rabbi Shimon says, if you're going to be very specific about when you plant and when it's good for your fruits or all that, it's going to be a very unclear. The rabbis don't like things to be unclear. Oh, for you, it's one thing. For you, it's a different time. Everyone has a different time. It makes it very confusing for a halachic system. He said, we're just going to give it a very clear date. Okay, the rains generally stop around Pesach. So Pesach is the date for the wheat fields, and Shavuot is the date for the trees. Okay, a field of trees. Okay, so that's what we basically have. So that's our Tosefet, which starts super early, as you notice. The Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, these are Amoraim, Mishum bar Kapara, who is a Tana. They said, Rabban Gamliel ubeit Dino nimnu al shnei prakim halalu ubitlum. Came Rabban Gamliel and he canceled this whole thing. He said, no, we're not going to start Tosefet then. No. Okay, it sounds like we're not going to have Tosefet at all. To which we have a big question about this. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Aval. Amar le Rish Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan. Either Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Aval or Rish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan. Either way, this question was asked. Rabban Gamliel ubeit Dino hechi matzu mevatzu takanta de Beit Shammai ubeit Hillel. V'hatnan. How could they possibly cancel a rule that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel instituted? You can't just do that. V'hatnan. It says in the Mishnah. One beitin can't come along and cancel something else another beitin instituted unless they're greater in intelligence and in minyan, in numbers. Now, the beitin of Rabban Gamliel was not greater than the beitin of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and therefore they have no rights to go canceling what Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel instituted. So this doesn't make any sense. To which they answer, well, right now we'll see, when whoever was asked the question, he was silent for a moment. This is a quote from Daniel, okay, also where he was silent for a moment, okay, didn't have a good answer. But then Amrle said to him, wait, Imor, you'll have to say, Kachi tenu benehem. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel made a stipulation when they did this, and they said, when they instituted Tosefet Shvi'it, they said, anyone who wants to come and cancel it is allowed to cancel it. So now they say, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Did he? Was it theirs to basically say we can get rid of this halacha? They made it up. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What's halacha l'Moshe Sinai? It means a very old halacha that was passed down from Moshe at Sinai, whether it was literally passed down or just we have a very old tradition about it. It stands somewhere in between. We have things that are forbidden by rabbinic law and things that are forbidden by Torah law. Torah law is always stronger. That's what we were just talking about earlier. And this is in between. Okay, it's right in between. It's stronger than a D'Rabbanan, but weaker than a D'Oraita, right? Stronger than rabbinic, weaker than Torah law. Now, how do we know it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai? In which case, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel don't have the rights to just get rid of it. Well, we see from here. Okay, he said in his name, we've seen this a bunch of times already in the Gemara. We definitely saw it in Sukkah and some other places as well. Eser nitiot, arava v'nisuch hamayim. We'll see why we saw it in Sukkah, because two of these halachas have to do with Sukkahs, are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. These three things were passed down from Moshe at Sinai. Let's talk about the last two. They're easy to explain. Arava is they would surround the mizbeach with the altar in the temple with aravot every day of, or many of the days of Sukkot. And Nisuch HaMayim is they would pour the water libations, also on the days of Sukkot. Eser Nitiyot is this law that if you have a field that has 10 new saplings, okay, within a space of 50 by 50 cubits, which is called a Beit Se'ah, then you're allowed to plow that field all the way until Rosh Hashanah. But what's implied from this? And that's Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai, you're allowed to do that. It's implied that Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai, though, if it's an old field and they're not saplings, but they're older trees and it's within this size, you can't plow them before Shemitah year because there's Tosefet Shvi'it. So there you see, this isn't something Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai made up. The Rabban Gamliel, since they stipulated anyone who wants to can come get rid of it, that's why Rabban Gamliel got rid of it. That makes no sense. It's Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai. It can't be gotten rid of. So what do they answer? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ki Gemire Hilchata Shloshim Yom Lefnei Rosh Hashanah. Now we're going to learn that there were stages. Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai, 30 days before you can't do anything. Not 4 months before, 5 months before, 6 months before, right? Pesach was almost 6 months before Rosh Hashanah, 5.5. So he says like this. The Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai was 30 days before. Came Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and said, oh, well, we're going to start even earlier because we feel like this is serving the upcoming year. But they made a stipulation. Why? They understood. It's hard enough for people not to work the land in the Shemitah year. Now we're adding more, and it might become a time where it's just too difficult for people to keep this. So they stipulated if they want to, and that's what Rabban Gamliel got rid of. He didn't get rid of Tosefet in general. He got rid of this extra Tosefet, okay? And that's what we mean, right? And this is what we're talking about. Well, we'll get to the D'Oraita part, okay? We'll get back. Remember, this was all to try to explain the statement of Rav Dimi, Yachol Yilkel Tosefet. You might have thought you get lashes for Tosefet, and Nasiv LaTalmud Liftorah. We're going to get back to really understanding this fully tomorrow. But now let's just finish up. We have one other question. Right now we're assuming Tosefet is Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai, and we derive that from this Etzer Nitiyot. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Hani Hilchataninu, Kraininu, comes from a verse, Ditnan, as we said, and this is where we said before, and this is where we're going to get to, it's D'Oraita, and if it's D'Oraita, you might have thought you get lashes. Ditnan b'charishu b'katzir tishpot. How do we understand this verse? We're going to machlok at Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael. We're only going to see Rabbi Yishmael's interpretation tomorrow, but we'll start with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva omer, ein tzarich lomar charish v'katzir shel shvi'it, shekvar ne'amar, sed chalot izra v'kamar chalot izmol. This is what I said earlier. Once we assume it's talking about Shemitah, but we don't need it for Shemitah because we already know you can't plant, you can't do anything like that. So you don't need to say b'charish or b'katzir tishpot. Ela charish shel erev shi'it shenichnas l'shvi'it. B'katzir shel shvi'it sheyatzah l'motzei shvi'it. It's talking about Tosefet. It means you can't do charisha before the year starts because that's preparing for next year. And you can't cut the month after, right? 30 days after, because you might, right? It doesn't say 30 days here, but they're basically saying a little before and a little after you can't cut because that's still connected to the previous year. And that's your Tosefet. So from here we see that it's not, and we're in the middle of a question here. We're going to have to end in a question, which is, how can you say that it's Halach L'Moshe B'Sinai if it actually is learned directly from the Torah? So we'll finish this up in tomorrow's class. So have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov, everyone.